Good evening, members and guests. Prayers this evening will be said by the Very Reverend John Richardson, Vicar of All Saints Church, Maidstone.
On this night, we give thanks for all those who were involved in bringing care, sustenance, nurture, and energy, time and counsel to all of us coping with COVID. We honour those who were in the emergency services and for all those who were critical workers in hospitals, in hospices, in nursing homes, in the emergency services, and in care in the community. We give thanks tonight for the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust, for all involved in Involve Kent and One Maidstone. And as we honour them, we give thanks for their integrity, their wisdom, their devotion and commitment to duty. So lighten our darkness, we beseech you, O Lord, and by your great mercy defend and continue to protect us from all dangers and all diseases this night and always. Amen. Thank you.
To advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. And let's hope it isn't. These proceedings will be webcast and recorded by the council, but but will anyone else be recording or filming them? I only ask this simply to let people know if this will be happening. Yes, please. Yeah. Okay. Is anybody else? I don't think so. Yes.
As Councillor Mackay is not here, I will reserve my right.
Oh, I was quite disappointed actually when I thought that it wouldn't be happening. Thank you, Councillor Cleese. That's very kind. Okay, thank you. Right, we go on to agenda item 2. I have received apologies from Councillors Barwick, Dawes, Forecast, Fort, Gooch, Harper, Higson, Jenkins, Baldock, Jones, Mackay, Parfitt, Reardon, Round, Springett and Travinsky. Are there any other apologies that I need to record? We need to record. Councillor Nagy?
Councillor Mark Nagy.
Ah, yes. Councillor Mark Nagy. Thank you. And no others?
And also Councillor Wilby.
Councillor Wilby. Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
Councillor Oliver may be late, but he should be coming.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I think that's it, is it? Thank you very much, councillors. Agenda item 3, are there any applications for dispensations? Don't think there are.
No, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, are there any disclosures of interest by members? Councillor Jeffrey?
I suspect many members would be classed as critical workers, as I suspect many of the officers would be as well, so I make that declaration.
Okay, well, that's fine. Are there any disclosures by officers?
In the same way.
The same way. Okay. Agenda item 5, are there any disclosures of logging? No, I don't think so. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's move on. Is it agreed that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed? Thank you. Agenda item 7, Mayor's announcements. I just got a few because this is probably not the right meeting really, but I did attend Rochester Cathedral for the investiture of 2 archdeacons at the cathedral, which is quite a very moving service. The Bishop of Rochester was there and the Dean of Rochester Cathedral. It is a lovely and magnificent cathedral, and Maidstone is in the Diocese of Rochester. So that was a very, very interesting point. The other thing I wanted to raise, which is quite dear to my heart, and it is to some other councillors, I attended the launch of the 2025 River Festival, which I've mentioned before, and I know this is very much down to Councillor Nagy, who's done an awful lot of work on it, but it is something I think that brings a lot of interest to the town. The river is our biggest single asset, and it's something I think people come to the town, enjoy themselves, and also spend money in the town. It improves the economy of Maidstone. So anything that does that, I think is good, provided it's legal, of course. So that's so it's very, very important. So, and many thanks to Councillor Nagy for organising this, which I think hopefully 2025 be as much fun as 2024 was. And so we all look forward to that. One other future meetings, I've got, I'm attending the Kent and Medway Youth Orchestra actually tomorrow with the Lord Lieutenant. She's a patron of the orchestra, and I'm going there to represent Maidstone as part of it, and I'm sure it'll be a wonderful performance. The other thing I wanted to, a couple of things, we have a Hindu festival coming up, which I'm attending. We are a very diverse, and I think one of the pleasures I've been as Mayor of Maidstone has been the diversity of our wonderful borough, and I'm attending this. I think it's called Holi. It's a Hindu festival, and I think that should be wonderful as well. And finally, just to say, my last event that I'm organising is a river trip going up from the Malta Inn, actually, up to the Farley Lock and coming back to Allington Castle. And Allington Castle has a huge, and we will be touring Allington Castle. And Allington Castle has a huge history, particularly at the Tudor times with the Wyatt family, who were courtiers to Henry VII and Henry VIII. So, and if any of it, we have a few vacancies on it. I'm doing a bit of self-promotion here, but it is a wonderful event. We've got a lot of mayors coming, but there are still a few seats available for councillors if they would like to attend. So I think it'll be a very interesting visit. So I think they're the things I just wanted to mention, the Mayor's announcement. Anybody got any questions? I'm happy to take them. No? Okay then, let's move on then. Right. It's question 8, isn't it? So are there any petitions? I doubt it. I didn't think there would be tonight. Agenda item 9. I'll call upon Councillor Jeffrey to move his motion to admit the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust, Involve Kent and One Maidstone to be honorary freemen of the borough on behalf of all key workers in the borough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sunday marks the 5th anniversary of the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 200,000 people died in the UK and more than 7 million worldwide. It was the largest UK peacetime emergency in 100 years. And we're here this evening to honour those key workers, or critical workers as they're technically known, who put their own lives at risk to ensure that others survived. We're going to be honouring all of the key workers in the borough with the freedom of the borough. This is simply an honour that councils can bestow on individuals, but it is individuals and organisations, but it is an honour. Looking at our roll call of those who have received the freedom of the borough over the last 80 years, local regiments have received this honour in recognition of the risk and sacrifice that they have made. So we think it's fitting that we do the same for key workers. COVID killed over 600 people in the borough, including many key workers across all sectors of the economy. The lockdowns affected our communities deeply, and during that time of deep anxiety, sadness and loss, it was the key workers from the public, private and voluntary sectors that kept working and kept people alive. The UK government defined key workers as those whose work was critical to the COVID-19 response. And these can be divided into those three economic sectors. The public sector, including people working in health and social care, education and childcare, the police, defence and justice, fire and rescue, local and national government and parishes, waste collection and disposal, public safety, national security, public service broadcasting, transport and many other key public services. The voluntary sector also includes people working in health and social care, but more widely in that community support that was so essential. And then the private sector, did I say private sector last time? I meant the voluntary sector. The private sector includes people working in the growing and production, the sale and distribution of food and other necessary goods, veterinary medicine, transport services, postal and delivery services, utilities, engineers, communications, water, financial services and so on. So we've agreed to give the award to one representative organisation from each of these sectors. Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust for the public sector, One Maidstone for the private sector, and Involve Kent for the voluntary sector. But remember, the award is for all of those critical workers in those sectors, i.e. the people who put their lives at risk to keep others alive and who were critical to that COVID response. My thanks to each and every key worker, whether you were a doctor, delivery driver, or a postman or refuse worker, anyone who put themselves at risk for others during the pandemic. So I move that pursuant to section 249 of the Local Government Act of 1972, on behalf of Maidstone's key workers, critical workers as defined by HM governments during the COVID pandemic, that the following organisations, in recognition of the eminent services rendered to this borough during the COVID-19 pandemic, Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust on behalf of all key workers in the public sector, Involve Kent on behalf of all key workers in the voluntary sector, and One Maidstone on behalf of all key workers in the private sector, be admitted to be honorary freemen of the borough of Maidstone, and that the role of honorary freedom of the borough be amended to include the above organisations and to express that it is received on behalf of all key workers in the borough for the eminent services rendered to this borough during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. I call upon the Councillor English to second the motion.
As Councillor Jeffrey remarked, the COVID-19 pandemic was the worst public health emergency or worst civil emergency in the country other than war that we had had probably since the Spanish flu situation immediately post-World War I, which of course wasn't Spanish flu, it just happened to be first reported there. A tremendous number of people across a tremendous range of fields contributed significantly to the response that went far above and beyond routine duty and went into life-threatening circumstances on many occasions. That includes the sectors we're talking about this evening, without whom there would have been a great deal more suffering and death. It is important that we recognise the risk that people were taking. Just to give you one example that is perhaps not that well known. If you've ever been in the Maidstone delivery office, Royal Mail office, you'll know just how a simple cold goes around that building because it's so badly designed and cramped. During the COVID emergency, Royal Mail Maidstone had one of the worst absentee records, with people going down from COVID in the country because of the design of the building. But people persevered and carried on. It is also important to mark historical fact. There are a large number of people out there who try and deny this event ever happened, who try to correct the historical record, who deny that medical services work. There are epidemics currently happening around the world where the government response is to turn their back and say it's not happening because they would need to use vaccines to deal with it. So it's important as a public authority that we recognise the historical facts as to what actually happened and record those. And this evening we are doing so. But the most important thing we're doing is thanking a large number of people, a few of whose are here this evening as representatives, for their service and for going above and beyond just the plain ordinary at substantial risk to themselves and their friends and family. So thank you very much on behalf of this council and the civic institutions of Maidstone. I'm honoured to second this motion.
Thank you, Councillor English. I now call upon other members who might wish to speak. Does anybody wish to? Councillor Cleaton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And Councillor.
I don't underestimate the risks these people took. I quite would have liked my son to be here today, but he's actually a porter at Maidstone Hospital and he's working. But he was one of the ones who came off his immune medication so he could return to work, because it was so stressful for his colleagues to be able to cope with what was going on. Former Councillor Hasty and I actually got stopped by the police because we were so grateful to actually see someone we knew when we were out doing our work in the community that we had to flash our Kent County Council, this person is allowed to be out because they're a key worker. We banged our pots and pans for key workers, but we must never forget those we lost. We also must never forget those that are still suffering the effects of long COVID. I cannot underestimate the risk people took. That first tranche of people who were allowed out to work did so, in many cases, without the correct PPE, without a vaccine, and have loved ones at home who were at risk, which meant they're in households. Although you were in the same house, you were actually separated. So I used to be downstairs when I came back in from work, and my son used to isolate in his bedroom before he actually came off his meds to go back to work. And that took some time. We cannot underestimate the impact that COVID had on people's mental well-being. I worked in mental health social care, and I had basically two sorts of clients that I used to go out and see. Those who were terrified and would only speak to me through the door, and those who were like, thank goodness I can go out the house, but 2 meters apart. It's only right that we recognise the sacrifices that people made. And I think we also should understand the work that went in by other colleagues who came from back office to go and work on the front line. People were very flexible. I was the Unison rep at KCC, and the work that went on, A, to try and get some damn PPE was enormous, and B, to support people into new roles where those who were vulnerable and couldn't come out were doing the telephone connecting, the actual keeping people in touch. So we're in my family's in quite a funny position, because my son works for Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells, so he'll be joining his nephew, who got the Freedom of Liverpool, for the work the army did on COVID. It cannot be underestimated, the work that went on, the risks that people took before there was a viable vaccine, and the work that other people did in the community. I was going to farm shops to get food for residents that I was working with, and I know others did the same. But I think we must recognise that this was one of the biggest crises that this country has faced, as Councillor English said, since Spanish flu, which originated in America, by the way, I'm just making that point, came over with the troops and then infected the whole of Europe. It's been the biggest risk. Now, we know that mistakes were made, and the COVID inquiry will hopefully deal with them. But at centre is the people who lost their lives, the people who worked through that pandemic, and the people who are still suffering today because of long COVID. I know, as has been mentioned by Councillor English, there are some that think it's all a con and it never happened. Well, I'm here to tell you, as a key worker during that time, it did, and it did incalculable damage, not only to people's physical health, but people's mental health as well. So I very much welcome the award of these organisations of Freedom of the Borough to represent everyone who went over and beyond the call of duty during the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peter. Yes, the Spanish flu originated, I believe, on a chicken farm in the United States, and the farmer was drafted into the US Army, and that's how it went down with the troops. And I have to say, my father got the Spanish flu, and he got it because he was serving in the end of the First World War. So yes, these things are terribly serious. I totally agree with you. Councillor Harwood, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to stand up and support what I think is a very worthy occasion that we need to reflect upon. It's almost exactly 5 years since the first nationwide lockdown in March 2020, and I think you don't realise when you're living through a genuinely epoch-making event like that. But here in Kent, I think we can hold our heads high, because if you look back to our command and control, our multi-agency planning and so on, with health, the emergency services and other partners, it actually began in January. So with horizon scanning and looking what was happening in Italy, looking at what was happening in the Far East, it enabled us to do a certain amount of planning. And I think where that came in most fundamentally importantly was not a very glamorous area, but it was around personal protective equipment. It was around PPE. And PPE, I mean, there's been all sorts of kind of coverage from it since, but in those early stages, you just could not purchase it through the usual routes. And here in Kent, we were able to procure PPE from every school lab, from every laboratory, from every university, and that was stockpiled and utilised throughout the event. And though absolutely rightly, our clinical settings are a key focus of the public perception around the pandemic, which went on to be known as COVID-19. I think it was in the care homes. That was where the real front line was in many ways. As we know earlier on with the seeking to avoid bed blocking and so on, a lot of care homes of all sizes were suddenly confronted with a major emergency, with care staff who were not trained and were not as experienced and so on as many of those within the public sector more broadly. And the work that they did, often on very low wages, the hours they worked, the fact that and also the tragedy that they had to deal with the families, with those individuals in their care, I don't think will ever be forgotten. And now I come back to another sector which I think has not had the thanks that they deserve, and that was those in retail, those in the supermarkets and so on, people working on checkouts and at the counters with queues of individuals when you were looking at the lurid news headlines, and no one really understood the virus fully. And if you actually look at some of the rates of illness and even deaths in some of those big stores, it was truly shocking, and that includes here in the county town. And so we really do need to remember retail, particularly those in the supermarkets and the hardware shops that kept going throughout the height of the pandemic. And then just finally, I will shut up now. I think it is worth saying that the Alpha variant was actually known as the Kent variant. And for those in the thick of it, we did not understand why we were seeing the rates of illness we were, why we were seeing the attack rates that we were. It was put down, was it linked to poverty? Was it linked to types of housing? Was it, there were certain parts of North Kent where the rates and the impact were going off the scale. And we just did not understand why. But finally, we knew that was, it was a new and more pervasive variant. And they don't like to name things after geographical areas anymore, but it's not a great claim to fame, is it? But as I say, I'll sit down now, but I just want to thank you all and also thank everybody in this borough who did their part, and particularly my condolences for all those who lost somebody during that period. And that's not just through COVID-19. That's through excess deaths, because you could not get to the doctors. It was the excess deaths because all of the stress and so on that was on people who had other chronic illnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Councillor Wilkinson, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today, as we honour our key workers with the freedom of the borough, I want to take a moment to recognise just some of the unseen challenges that you faced. Few people know that many of our key workers were on minimum wage, despite being the backbone of our community. Few know that supermarket staff face verbal and even physical abuse just for enforcing safety rules. That bus drivers had one of the highest death rates due to daily exposure, or that waste collectors worked tirelessly handling possibly infected medical waste, often without recognition. Factory workers and food supply workers were also at huge risk as warehouses became COVID hotspots. Then there were the volunteers who stepped forward in ways few could imagine, delivering food and medicine to the vulnerable and even sitting with patients in their final moments so no one had to die alone. Even assisting in overcrowded mortuaries, ensuring dignity for those who we lost. There was also a rise in PTSD and mental health issues, studies showing that frontline healthcare workers experienced PTSD rates similar to war veterans. Many of them also wrote wills, fearing that they might not make it through, some even preparing letters for their loved ones. And while teachers were expected to teach from home, many went further, delivering food parcels, checking in on vulnerable students, and working longer hours than ever before. What I have mentioned is just the tip of the iceberg on the sacrifices that were made by our town's many key workers and volunteers, Not many people will fully understand what they went through. Each one is a link in the chain that, if broken, would be detrimental to society in many ways. This is why the award is so important, to recognise the sacrifices made during this harrowing time. Thank you to every one of you who stepped up and made a difference.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. That's very well said, if I may say so. Councillor Cook, I believe you wanted the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I welcome this. I think we had a debate on how we should recognise this, but to have the three sectors represented in the way that we are doing this today is something that I fully support. I have my own personal thank you to Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust, because they saved my life in November, so thank you very much for that. I recognise the work that's involved amongst the voluntary sector, and we talk about the education, and whilst this is recognising what the sectors have done to support our communities and our representatives, we are still living with the legacy of COVID, and that's something that we absolutely need to take on board. Whatever happens to this authority going forward in the future, that legacy is going to follow it. And we have a lot, not just in this borough, but throughout the county, throughout the southeast, throughout England, of young people who are living with the mental health issues as a consequence of COVID. And I think we need to look at how we address that, and as pertinent a recognition for our critical workers and what they did in terms of running to the danger, people coming back and going to work when they didn't need to be, to support us all. That it's up to us to provide a measure in the future that actually recognises those still in need, and actually to provide a platform that gives them the support they need, not just now, but into that future as well. So can I, on behalf of myself, my group, and join the accolades? I think Maureen, you spoke brilliantly, and everyone's spoken brilliantly today, which is a lovely thing to be able to say. But thank you to the NHS Trust. Thank you to Involve on behalf of the volunteers. There are so many, and obviously to One Maidstone as well. I think the work that everybody did was exemplary, and we are all indebted, some of us more than others. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the analogies that I consider at the time of the pandemic was if you imagine a child and you show a child a glass and you fill it with rocks, and you say to that child, "Is that glass full?" And the child will say, "Yes, it's right up to the top, that's full." That really represents you guys. You stood up, you got yourself involved, and we could see that there was, we had someone there seeing our backs. But then you could then say to that child, "Hold on just a minute," and you can get a handful of sand and you can put it around the rocks, and the child looks in amazement while you can show him, "But do you feel that that's now full?" And the child will say, "Yes, of course, it's right up to the top." And then you can get a glass of water. And I think that really is the way that this pandemic, the support to it, sort of rolled out, because we knew what we thought we needed. But in my ward, for instance, we actually we were nervous about it because the North Lewes Residents Association, one of our big organisations which acts like a parish, almost all of the members apart from one was over 70. So they came to myself and Derek Mortimer as local ward councillors and said, we really are going to struggle because we're going to be isolated and we won't be able to give that support. So we went out and we put leaflets out as far as we could. We just got a whole bunch printed to say how people could make contact with us. But on the bottom, we said if anyone can help us get more of these leaflets out, because we didn't feel we could do it on our own. And within 24 hours, we had 50 volunteers. And not only did they say that we'll help you get them out, but we've got printers, just send us the PDF. And it's quite remarkable how once you've got those rocks in the glass, you start to see the sand, you start to see the water, and you start to get an amazing response. And in my area, people were calling saying that they were really scared because they couldn't, their family members were in Surrey. So we worked out a rota with those 50 volunteers to help pick up. We'd have it where people would call us in the morning, give us their prescriptions. We'd call those in, and then in people's exercise time, they would go to the local pharmacy, collect, and then deliver in the local area as part of their exercise. And we did that right up until May, every day. And it was quite overwhelming sometimes, but whenever you asked more volunteers, they just came on stream. It was unbelievable. But I did want to just mention something that's a little bit more light-hearted to finish on. I know this is very serious, and I know that the response was remarkable, and we will use that response should this come back around. But I just wanted to give an example. We used to go down to the hub. We used to work with officers that turned up relentlessly. Some of those officers are in this chamber. And I remember getting a call to say, because nobody's going to the shops or they're just going to get their critical food, Nestle have called to say that people aren't buying Easter eggs or they couldn't get these Easter eggs out. So down at the hub, we had pallets of Easter eggs. And I remember going down there, I had a Chiran, which is a car that you can take the seats out of. And the officer said, how many would you like to take? And we said, we'll take the pallet. And we called, the first place we called was Parkway School. And we knew that there were some children that had their parents were key workers. And we had no idea. We just called them and said, look, we've got some Easter eggs. Would you like us to drop by? Unbelievable response. And then we followed up with other schools. We followed up with care homes in the local area. Then we started to give them to other members. We went back for another pallet. And it was just a little piece of joy. And it was amazing, really, to think that Nestle, they just had stocks that they were going to destroy, but they thought about getting them to the borough. And when you start to ask the questions, you can get things out. And in my ward, we had the 10,000 COVID test, which was incredibly stressful for people. They really didn't know what was going on. But by getting that early day volunteer information, people had the information they needed to help to reassure them that we were all sort of working together. And it was remarkable. It was remarkable across all parties, across all members, because we were all meeting up at places like the hub, and it really didn't matter what political persuasion you were. You just got a real sense that we were in it together, and we were going to get through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Does anybody else wish to speak? I want to give everybody a chance because this is such an important matter.
Councillor Thompson.
Councillor Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members and honoured guests. I beg some latitude for my remarks, given my lifelong employment as a local biology teacher, following Councillor Jeffrey's lead. So may we share some historical and cultural reflection this evening. From March 23rd, 2020, a parade of persons on television proclaims the pandemic and lockdown were unprecedented, or some such nonsense. Certainly my students learned of the extended delay since a significant UK disease outbreak, the influenza outbreak of 1918, which was called Spanish flu, largely as the open Spanish media freely reported what was kept under some sort of censorship elsewhere. It is true that the 250,000 or so deaths, many of young people in the United Kingdom, were not given a public memorial in this country. and that doubtless reflects the coincidence with the tragedies of the Great War. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, wrote George Santayana in his 1905 The Life of Reason. What must be remembered must be recorded and then taught. In Christchurch, New Zealand, a chapel was erected to honour 3 nurses lost in 1915 on the torpedoed troopship SS Marquette, and also for 2 nurses who died during the 1918 flu pandemic. This modest memorial has withstood neglect, calls for its removal, even the 2010 earthquake. There is a lesson for us all, Mr. Mayor. We will remember them, both those who fell in battles and those who care for them who survive. We should refrain from valorising only those whose lives are given and taken in the violence of human conflicts in various fields of battle. Disease follows us through both war and peace. The commitment of those who care to serve other than with guns may warrant no lesser valuation, their courage no less esteem. The sacrifice of those who fall deserves no lesser recognition. Many of us now know more about bacterial and viral pathogens than was the case just a few decades ago, though much of the wisdom of immunisation and antibiotic regimes, so hard won, is now more often rejected and even despised. Stoically putting the past behind us may be a British superpower, while the silencing of grief and the failure to learn corporate lessons ought not to be the corollaries, nor the abandonment of gratitude, which in our rich and networked economy is due in many quarters beyond the representatives joining us today. But many in certain groups faced more peril for the vulnerable, old and young alike. Lest we forget, we are pleased to formally honour them today. Formalising thanks means sometimes we ring the bell for others, or they for us. John Donne had it right. No man is an island. Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. I close, Mr. Mayor, as a representative of all our guests this evening with the words of the Greek physician of Kos in the 4th century before Christ. As you, Mr. Mayor, are a classical scholar, I know this will be of value to you. The wise doctor performed surgery and prescribed what treatment he could, facing largely mysterious disease, as COVID was for us, we may recall. At his conclusion, he reflected as follows: life is short and art long. The crisis fleeting, experience perilous, and decision difficult. A profound and insightful conclusion, then and now, Mr. Mayor, 2,400 years later. I hope we will all prove teachable in regard of these things, as further challenges, novel challenges, will assail us in the future. And we are grateful, Mr. Mayor, as it is clear where we can expect support and care in our future times of need. So I support the motion.
I can't see him.
Okay. Does anybody else? Final? No? Okay. Well, thank you all for speaking. It was, I think a lot of very moving words were said, so and I think that's something we'll all have reflection on. Thank you. I will now turn to the issue of the motion, and I will now put the motion to the council. The motion must be passed by not less than 2/3 of the members voting. So we do have to have a formal vote, not a named vote, but a formal vote. Yes, thank you. Sorry?
We need to ask all those for.
Yeah. So who's in favour?
Anybody against?
Anybody against? Okay. Any abstentions? That's unanimous. I think that is unanimous. If my eyes aren't very good, but I think we do. Well done. Thank you very much, members. Thank you. It has been agreed by the Council to admit the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust, Involve Kent and One Maidstone to be honorary freemen of the borough on behalf of Maidstone's key workers in recognition of the eminent services rendered to the borough during the COVID-19 pandemic. I now invite representatives from these organisations to come forward to join me and the Chief Executive to sign the roll of the roll of honorary freedom. Thank you. Okay.
So you just need to do this bit now.
Yes, sir. Yep. Right. I now call upon the Chief Executive to read the certificate of honorary freedom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I say it's my absolute privilege to read the citation that appears on the Borough of Maidstone Certificate of Honorary Freedom that embraces all our fellow key workers. Be it remembered that at an extraordinary meeting of the Maidstone Borough Council held on the 6th day of March 2025, by vote of the Borough Council, it was resolved that pursuant to Section 249 of the Local Government Act 1972, on behalf of Maidstone's key workers, critical workers as defined by HM Government during the COVID-19 pandemic, the following organisations, in recognition of the eminent services rendered to this borough during the COVID-19 pandemic, those organisations being the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust, on behalf of all key workers in the public sector, Involve Kent, on behalf of all key workers in the voluntary sector, and One Maidstone, on behalf of all key workers in the private sector, be admitted to be honorary freemen of the Borough of Maidstone. And this is given under the seal of the Borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Executive. I beg to tender you the right hand of friendship and present each of you representatives of our sectors the certificate of the honorary freedom of the borough. I now invite the representatives from the Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NH Trust, Involve Kent and Maidstone to reply. I think Mr. Giles Scott, are you first on? I don't know who is first.
Yeah, that'll be me. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Miles Scott and I'm the Chief Executive of Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells NHS Trust, or Maidstone Hospital, whichever you prefer. This is a huge honour for our staff and our colleagues. I really want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor English and all members of the Council for unanimously bestowing this honour. I absolutely acknowledge as well that this isn't just for colleagues at Maidstone Hospital, this is for key workers across the whole of the NHS and the wider public sector, and it will give me great pride to display this very fine certificate in the reception at Maidstone Hospital, so that people can see that, and so that it is there as a permanent memory. Councillors have spoken very movingly about the impact of the pandemic, and I'm not going to try to compete with any of your speeches, but I know people spoke from the heart in what they said, and I can honestly say that your compliments and your comments are absolutely matched by sincere thanks from people in our hospital, but also across the public sector. And I think it is important to remember just how much the support of local people enabled us to carry on. When a number of the councillors have mentioned PPE shortages, for example, and one of the great privileges of working in this part of Kent was that we had huge numbers of people, particularly in the first wave of the pandemic, looking at how they could, and people downloading things from the internet about how you could create PPE, people donating hand creams, donating food for key workers. I remember the Easter eggs as well that were mentioned previously. People standing outside their front doors and banging pots and pans and applauding key workers. Drivers wearing badges saying thank you to the NHS, thank you to key workers, and that support from local people really was hugely important, and it meant that as time went on, and actually the pandemic got in some ways less scary. The first wave was particularly scary, but as it went on, it got I think people wanted it to be over, didn't they? Well, people didn't want it to start, but particularly when we got into the second wave, it was winter, it was just really, really hard. And as I say, that support that we felt from the local community really was an inspiration to many of us who were coming to work every day. And the way that, for example, in supermarket queues, people respected the fact that key workers were sometimes given an opportunity to go at particular hours. The whole community joined in, I suppose, is what I'm saying about my experience of the pandemic. So I think this award is very very appropriate and is very well received, but it's emblematic, I think, of the work that and the spirit of the whole community, not just of key workers. So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you ever so much. I call upon Mr. Gary Wells of Involve Kent.
Good evening, friends. It is an absolute privilege to accept the Freeman of the Borough on behalf of the local voluntary community and social enterprise sector. The recognition is testament to the incredible dedication, resilience and compassion demonstrated by our frontline staff and volunteers across the voluntary sector during one of the most challenging times in recent history. There is an old adage that in the most difficult times and challenging times, bring out the best in people, and this was certainly evident through the COVID pandemic, which showed us the strength, the solidarity and the resilience of our communities and the voluntary sector organisations that support them. Some of the biggest problems I had throughout the pandemic were, firstly, through the first 4 weeks, we were unable to make outgoing calls in our office because we had such a flood of people wanting to volunteer, put themselves out there on the front line and support their communities. So huge amounts of respect to all of the people in communities who stood up and wanted to volunteer and be involved in the efforts. The second issue I had was getting staff to go home at a reasonable hour. In fact, quite often at 9, 10 o'clock at night, I'd be phoning staff up saying, I can't go to bed until I know everyone's home and safe. And staff were saying, I'm just going to call Brian because he wasn't very sure when I called him this morning, he's having a bit of a bad day, or I'm just going to deliver this piece of medication or make sure this family have got food. Staff sacrifice living with their families in order to be on the front line and to work for us, even though they had no contractual obligation to do so. So I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude for every volunteer, staff member and partner organisation who contributed to these efforts. Your hard work and dedication have not only helped us navigate through the pandemic, but have also strengthened the fabric of our community. And I hope that as we face ongoing challenges in our community, we face huge amounts of loneliness and isolation, the spirit of the pandemic can continue to help us fight these new and emerging challenges. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Finally, I'll call upon Miss Michelle Woodland of 1 Maidstone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm deeply honoured to accept this award on behalf of the resilient businesses of Maidstone. Throughout the pandemic, the private sector provided essential services to those who lived and worked in our community. For instance, banks played a crucial role by helping individuals and businesses gain access to loans, to pause mortgages, or to navigate the rapidly changing situation. Shop workers, as mentioned previously, at supermarkets and food stores were indispensable and ensuring that retailers could continue to trade. Restaurants and food retailers adapted by offering takeaways and meal bundles, and we must not forget the delivery staff who kept everything moving. Pharmacies such as Boots in the mall and on Fremlin Walk remained open to serve the community, and security staff continued to patrol and monitor people and property, ensuring safety and order. There are so many stories shared tonight, and it's been really humbling listening to all of them, and I cannot stress how much of a privilege it is to be here to represent those businesses and the private sector. I know that at the time when COVID was happening, I was actually furloughed, and I was a member of staff from a local theatre that some of you may know, and that I know that there was one remaining staff member that had to go in and adapt, and his duties then meant that he was going in and flushing toilets and keeping the taps running and doing all of the maintenance checks throughout the building. And it was quite a lonely role. And I know that he was approached by security as leaving the car park, you know, why are you in town? What are you doing? And he was keeping that business and that property alive so that when we were all able to return, that business and that building was still able to be used. I'd like to just finally say thank you, and let us celebrate these private sector heroes with this award. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the words you've all said. It's been an honour for me personally to be able to present you with this freedom of the borough and to invite you to our wonderful town hall, which I think we're all very, very proud of. And you've done a fantastic work, and you represent our community. This is a fantastic community. As mayor, I'm absolutely proud to be mayor of such a diverse and fantastic community. And you've helped that and helped it to survive in what has been one of the most dangerous situations our country has ever faced. So many, many thanks, and for me personally, many, many thanks. So thank you very much. I'd like to do it again. Right, now I have to say I declare the meeting closed, and I should be pleased if members could join me and our guests in the Beauvais room, which is opposite over there, and guests in the Beauvais room for refreshments. So many thanks again, everybody, for coming. Thank you.